The phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. I still remember the exact time because it was the moment my life split into two parts, before and after. Before that call, I was a wife, I was loved, I had a future. After that call, I was a widow. I reached for my phone with sleepy eyes, expecting to see Ethan's name on the screen. He was driving home from a business trip, and he often called me late at night just to hear my voice. Instead, an unfamiliar number appeared. "Hello," I answered. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Is this Mrs. Ethan Carter?" My stomach tightened. "Yes. I'm Officer Reynolds with the state police. I'm afraid there's been an accident." The next few minutes felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A truck driver had fallen asleep behind the wheel. Ethan's car had been crushed instantly. The officer kept talking, but his words became distant echoes. There had been no suffering, he said, no pain, no chance to say goodbye. I dropped the phone and collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The scream that left my throat didn't even sound human. For 10 years, Ethan had been my best friend, my partner, my safe place. We had built a life together from almost nothing. We laughed together, dreamed together, and planned for a future that suddenly no longer existed. And now he was gone, just gone. The following days passed in a blur of tears, paperwork, and unbearable silence. Every corner of our house reminded me of him. His coffee mug sat beside the sink. His jacket still hung near the front door. His favorite book remained open on the nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to touch any of it. The funeral home director helped me make arrangements for the burial, but every decision felt impossible. What flowers would Ethan have wanted? What music should be played? How was I supposed to choose a casket for the man I expected to grow old with? Each choice felt like another wound. Eventually, I realized I needed my family. No matter how distant we'd become over the years, they were still my parents. Surely they would support me now. Surely this tragedy would bring us together. With trembling hands, I called my mother. She answered on the third ring. "Hello." The moment I heard her voice, I broke down. "Mom," I whispered through sobs. "Ethan is gone." There was a brief silence. "Oh," she said. Just one word. "Oh," no gasp, no sympathy. No shock, nothing. I swallowed hard. "The funeral is this Saturday." Another pause, then she sighed. "Saturday." Something in her tone made my stomach sink. "Yes, that's unfortunate." I blinked. "What?" "Your father and I already have plans this weekend." For a second I thought I had misheard her. "Mom, Ethan died." "I know that." Her voice sounded irritated rather than saddened. "We've booked a resort trip for months. Canceling now would be expensive." I sat frozen. I couldn't believe this conversation was real. "You're talking about a vacation, and you're asking us to rearrange our lives." I stared at the wall in disbelief. My husband was dead. The man I loved more than anything had been buried in paperwork before he'd even be buried in the ground. And my mother was worried about a hotel reservation. The pain in my chest deepened. "Mom, I need you." Her response came immediately. "No, sweetheart, you're an adult. You'll manage." The words hit harder than any slap. Before I could respond, my father picked up the extension. I hoped, desperately hoped, that he would be different. Instead, he was worse. "Your mother explained everything," he said. "Dad, please tell me you're coming." There was a long sigh. "Honey, we're sorry Ethan passed away, but this isn't exactly a major family event." I couldn't speak. My hands shook violently. "What did you say?" "It sounds harsh, but funerals happen all the time." I felt something inside me crack. Then my mother spoke again, words I would never forget, words that would echo in my memory for years. "Sweetheart, a burial is a trivial event compared to everything else happening in life." A trivial event. My husband's burial, the final goodbye to the love of my life. Trivial. Tears streamed down my face. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Then I quietly ended the call. No yelling, no argument, no pleading, just silence. I sat alone in my kitchen for nearly an hour afterward. The grief I felt for Ethan was unbearable. But the grief I felt for the family I thought I had was almost as painful. Something changed in me that day. The daughter who spent her entire life chasing her parents' approval finally stopped running. The funeral arrived 3 days later. The church was filled with Ethan's friends, co-workers, and relatives. His parents sat beside me, holding my hands while I cried. My mother and father's seats remained empty. As the minister spoke about Ethan's kindness and generosity, I looked at those empty chairs. For the first time, I saw the truth clearly. Blood didn't make people family, love did, and while I was burying my husband that day, I was also burying something else. The belief that my parents would ever love me the way I deserved. I didn't know it yet, but that realization would become the beginning of my freedom. The weeks after Ethan's funeral felt like living underwater. Everything moved slowly. Sounds seemed distant. Colors looked dull. Some mornings I woke up expecting to hear Ethan humming in the kitchen, only to remember that he was gone. Then the grief would hit me all over again, fresh and merciless. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. Ethan had owned a small but successful construction company, and before he died, he had gradually taught me every aspect of the business. At the time, I thought he was simply sharing his passion. Now I realized he had unknowingly prepared me to survive without him. Still, every day was a struggle. One afternoon, about a month after the burial, my cousin Melissa called. Her voice sounded hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." There was a pause. "Are you okay?" I almost laughed. "My husband died 5 weeks ago. What do you think?" "That's not what I mean." A knot formed in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" Melissa sighed. "Aunt Karen and Uncle Robert have been saying some things." My chest tightened immediately. "My parents, what things?" She hesitated again. "They've been telling people you're refusing to move on." I sat upright. "What?" "They've been saying you're exaggerating your grief and using Ethan's death to get attention." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The words felt like a punch to the stomach. My own parents were saying this after skipping the funeral. After calling Ethan's burial a trivial event, they said that. I whispered. Melissa's voice softened. "I'm sorry. I thought you knew." I didn't, and somehow the truth hurt even more than their absence at the funeral. When the call ended, I sat in silence staring at the wall. Part of me wanted to believe Melissa was mistaken, but deep down I knew she wasn't. The next few days proved it. Several relatives who had once checked on me stopped returning calls. Others became strangely distant. One aunt suggested I should focus on positive things. Another told me that grieving for months was unhealthy. The comments didn't make sense until another cousin finally revealed why. My parents had been spreading a story. According to them, I had become obsessed with being a widow. They claimed I was refusing to heal. They said I enjoyed the sympathy. The lies spread through the family like poison, and the worst part, many people believed them. I wasn't surprised. My parents had always controlled the narrative. For as long as I could remember, they had been experts at making themselves look reasonable while making me look difficult. As painful as it was, their behavior forced me to confront memories I had spent years ignoring. Growing up, I was never enough. My younger brother, Jason, was the golden child. When he earned average grades, my parents celebrated. When I earned top marks, they asked why I hadn't done better. When Jason forgot birthdays, people laughed. When I made a mistake, I was criticized for weeks. I spent my entire childhood chasing approval that never came. Even after I married Ethan, nothing changed. My parents constantly compared me to Jason. If Ethan and I bought a house, Jason's apartment was somehow more impressive. If I received a promotion, Jason's latest hobby became the topic of conversation. No matter what happened, I came second. For years, Ethan had been the only person who truly saw it. They don't deserve your loyalty. He used to tell me gently, but I always defended them. They're still my parents, that's what I would say. Now, sitting alone in the house we once shared, I finally understood what Ethan had been trying to tell me. Love shouldn't have to be earned. Family shouldn't treat your pain like a burden. And parents shouldn't mock their daughter's grief. A few days later, Ethan's mother invited me to dinner. I almost declined. Socializing felt impossible. But she insisted. When I arrived, Ethan's father greeted me with a hug. His mother immediately pulled me into the kitchen and handed me a cup of tea. Neither of them asked me to stop crying. Neither told me to move on. Neither acted uncomfortable when I mentioned Ethan's name. Instead, they listened for hours. We shared stories about him. We laughed at old memories. We cried together. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. Before I left, Ethan's mother squeezed my hand. "You will always be family to us." The words nearly broke me, because they came so naturally from people who had no obligation to love me. Meanwhile, my own parents couldn't spare enough compassion to attend their son-in-law's funeral. That night, I sat in my car outside my house for nearly 20 minutes. I kept thinking about the difference between the two families. One shared my grief, the other mocked it. One supported me, the other betrayed me. The choice suddenly seemed obvious. When I got home, I opened my phone. I stared at my parents' contact information. Then I blocked both numbers, my mother's, my father's. Jason's, every single one. No warning, no dramatic message, no explanation, just silence. The same silence they had given me when I needed them most. For the first time in my life, I stopped chasing people who didn't value me. And as painful as it was, I felt something unexpected beneath the grief. Relief, because the truth was finally impossible to ignore. I hadn't lost my family when Ethan died. I had lost them long before that. I was only now finding the courage to walk away. The first few months after cutting contact with my parents were harder than I expected. Not because I missed them, but because I was finally facing the truth. For years, I had convinced myself that things would get better. I believed that if I worked harder, loved more, forgave faster, or sacrificed enough, my parents would eventually treat me like a daughter instead of an obligation. Accepting that they never would was painful, yet strangely freeing. Without their constant criticism in my life, I began noticing something unexpected. I could finally breathe. The guilt that had followed me for decades slowly started to fade. For the first time, my phone wasn't filled with messages telling me what I should be doing, who I should be helping, or why I wasn't good enough. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, then it became peaceful. I poured all my energy into the construction company Ethan had left behind. Many people expected the business to fail after his death. Some clients quietly questioned whether I could handle leadership on my own. Even a few employees seemed uncertain. I understood their doubts. Before Ethan passed away, I had mostly worked behind the scenes. Now I was the owner. The responsibility was enormous, but every time fear threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered Ethan's faith in me. "You are stronger than you think," he always said. Those words became my anchor. I learned everything I could. I attended business seminars. I studied contracts late into the night. I met with clients personally and listened carefully to employees. Mistakes happened, some days were disasters, but I kept moving forward. 6 months later, the company was doing better than it ever had before. Several major contracts increased our revenue significantly. We expanded our team. Local newspapers even published articles about the company's growth under new leadership. For the first time, people weren't seeing me as Ethan's widow. They were seeing me as a capable businesswoman. I wished Ethan could have witnessed it. Every success still felt bittersweet without him. One evening, while organizing old files in his office, I discovered a notebook hidden inside a desk drawer. The cover was worn and faded. Inside were pages filled with Ethan's handwriting. At first, I smiled. Then I started crying. The notebook contained years of ideas, dreams, and plans for the future. But one section stopped me cold. The title at the top of the page read, "Helping Others." Underneath was a detailed plan for a community foundation. Ethan wanted to create scholarships for students who had lost parents. He wanted to fund grief counseling programs. He wanted families facing tragedy to receive support they couldn't otherwise afford. I sat there reading for hours. The more I read, the more determined I became. His dream deserved to live, and if Ethan couldn't build it himself, I would do it for him. Over the next year, I dedicated countless hours to turning that vision into reality. With help from attorneys, community leaders, and several generous donors, we established the Ethan Carter Memorial Foundation. The foundation offered scholarships, counseling assistance, and emergency grants for grieving families. The response exceeded every expectation. Applications poured in. Donations increased. Stories arrived from people whose lives had been changed because someone had chosen to help them during their darkest moments. Each success felt like a conversation with Ethan, a way of keeping him close. Eventually, local news stations began covering the foundation's work. Interviews followed, community awards followed after that, and with every article published, my visibility grew. That was when my parents suddenly remembered I existed. The first email arrived nearly 18 months after Ethan's funeral. The subject line read, "We need to talk." I stared at the message for several minutes before opening it. My mother wrote as though nothing had happened, no apology, no acknowledgement of the funeral, no regret. Just complaints. She claimed the family missed me. She said I was overreacting. She insisted that enough time had passed. The most unbelievable part came near the end. "We are still your family." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Family? Where had that family been when I buried my husband? Where had that family been when they spread lies about my grief? Where had that family been during the countless nights I cried myself to sleep? The answer was simple. Nowhere. I deleted the email without responding. Over the following weeks, more messages appeared. Some came from my parents. Others came from relatives acting as intermediaries. The timing wasn't a coincidence. News articles about the foundation were circulating. The business was thriving. People were praising my work publicly. Suddenly, reconciliation mattered. Suddenly, family was important. Suddenly, they wanted a relationship. But I finally understood something that had taken me decades to learn. People who abandon you during your worst moments don't automatically deserve a place in your best ones. My silence wasn't bitterness. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, a healthy one. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a large charity gala honoring community leaders. The foundation was being recognized for its impact. As I stood on the stage rehearsing my speech, I looked out at the empty seats. A smile touched my lips, not because life was perfect. I still missed Ethan every single day, but because I had survived. The woman who once begged for acceptance no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who finally understood her worth. And for the first time in my life, silence wasn't loneliness. Silence was power. 2 years after Ethan's death, I stood backstage at the largest event the Ethan Carter Memorial Foundation had ever hosted. The ballroom buzzed with conversation and laughter. More than 300 guests had gathered to celebrate the foundation's anniversary and honor the lives that had been touched through its programs. As I peeked through the curtain, I saw scholarship recipients talking with donors, grieving families sharing stories of hope, and volunteers proudly wearing foundation badges. Everything around me existed because of Ethan's dream, a dream that had survived even after he was gone. For a moment, emotion tightened my throat. I wished he could see it. I wished he could stand beside me and witness what his kindness had become. But in a strange way, I felt him there, not physically, but in every smile, every success story, and every person whose burden had become a little lighter because of the foundation. A volunteer approached me. "Everyone is ready." I nodded, then she hesitated. "There's something else you should know." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She lowered her voice. "Your parents are here." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. "My parents," she nodded. "They arrived about 20 minutes ago." A strange calm settled over me, not anger. Not panic, just calm. The old version of me would have been devastated. She would have worried about creating conflict. She would have wondered how to fix things, but that woman no longer existed. I quietly thanked the volunteer and looked toward the ballroom entrance. There they were, my mother and father, dressed elegantly, smiling, acting as though they belonged there. I immediately understood why they had come. The foundation had become well known throughout the region. Several local officials were attending. News reporters were present. My parents weren't there because they loved me. They were there because success attracts attention, and they wanted to stand close enough to claim a piece of it. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. A few minutes later, the event began. Guests took their seats while a short video highlighted the foundation's work over the previous year. The audience applauded as stories appeared on the screen. Students who had received scholarships, families who had received counseling support, widows and widowers who had found hope after devastating loss. Many people wiped away tears, including me. Then it was time for my speech. I stepped onto the stage. The room immediately became quiet. Hundreds of faces looked toward me. Among them were my parents. For a brief moment our eyes met. I saw expectation in their expressions. Perhaps they believed I would acknowledge them. Perhaps they imagined I would publicly welcome them back into my life. They had clearly mistaken kindness for weakness. I approached the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight." The audience applauded. I took a slow breath. 2 years ago, I lost the love of my life. The room fell silent. At the time, I believed my world had ended. I paused. But grief has a way of teaching us important truths. People listened carefully. One of those truths is that the people who stand beside you during your darkest moments reveal who they truly are. Several heads nodded. When everything falls apart, some people disappear. The silence deepened, and others become your shelter. I smiled toward Ethan's parents, who sat in the front row. His mother immediately began crying. His father squeezed her hand. I learned that family is not defined by blood. My voice remained steady. Family is defined by love, by loyalty, by compassion, by the people who show up when your heart is broken. The audience erupted into applause. I didn't look toward my parents. I didn't need to. The message wasn't hidden. Everyone understood it, including them. I continued speaking, thanking the volunteers, donors, staff members, and supporters who had helped transform Ethan's dream into reality. I shared stories of hope and resilience. I celebrated the people who had chosen kindness when others chose indifference. When the speech ended, The audience rose to its feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. As applause filled the ballroom, tears filled my eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of gratitude, because I finally understood something that grief had taken years to teach me. Healing wasn't about forgetting, it wasn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It was about refusing to let that hurt define the rest of your life. After the event, dozens of guests approached to congratulate me. Students thanked me, families hugged me. Donors offered additional support. Throughout it all, my parents remained on the other side of the room, watching, waiting, expecting an opportunity. Eventually, my mother approached. Her smile looked forced. "You gave a beautiful speech." I simply nodded. She shifted uncomfortably. "We should talk sometime." For years, those words would have filled me with hope. Now they meant nothing. I looked at her calmly. I already said everything I needed to say. The smile vanished from her face. For once, there was no argument, no excuse, no manipulation, because there was nothing left to discuss. They had made their choice the day they called Ethan's burial a trivial event, and I had made mine. I turned and walked toward Ethan's parents, who welcomed me with open arms. As they embraced me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. My parents remained behind me, not as villains, not as enemies, just strangers who happened to share my last name. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. I hadn't destroyed them. I hadn't humiliated them. I hadn't wasted years seeking revenge. Instead, I built a beautiful life without them. A life filled with purpose, love, and people who genuinely cared. As I left the ballroom surrounded by the family I had chosen, I silently thanked Ethan, because even after death, he had given me one final gift: the courage to stop calling people family when they never acted like it in the first place.